Welcome everybody. You're listening to the 3.4%, the show where we talk about our research on the hypersexualization of queer women in media. I'm Andrea Kling.
And I'm Tori Helfrick. Wait, why is this called the 3.4%?
That's the percentage of adult women who identify as queer. I mean, the ones who are willing to admit it.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, welcome to the inaugural episode of our humble show. We started this research as part of our senior seminar class at Shippensburg University, and you're about to see how it turned out.
Before we jump in and inevitably end up getting carried away, let's break down some terms in the focus of our research. We looked at different forms of media, namely TV shows, movies, and TikTok, and the portrayals of queer women within those mediums. We've defined queer women as bisexual, lesbian, pansexual, or really any non heterosexual woman. We started out by seeking out research that has already been done about this topic and then set out to compile evidence based on what we already knew and what we suspected to be true. To bring in additional voices, we interviewed some old and new friends who helped give us insight into their experiences with hypersexualization as queer women. Much of our research was done through the lens of feminist theory and the male gaze, which are topics explored by Judith Butler and Laura Mulvey, respectively.
In Laura Mulvey's article, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, she describes women in their traditional exhibitionist role as simultaneously looked at and displayed with their appearance coded for strong visual and erotic impact. What this is basically saying is that women in film exist for men to look at. We know that men are the ones who the looking is for because of what she says earlier in her article, which is that in a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female. Similarly to Mulvey in her article Haley Kiyoko and Positive Media Representations of Queer Women of Color, Hannah Rafauf points out how popular music artist Haley Kiyoko breaks stereotypes of the male gaze and the fetishized colonizer fantasies by taking creative control over her lyrics and the directing of her music videos. This article also uses postmodern theory and the idea of controlling images to bring attention to overarching stereotypes that are used to justify the oppression of marginalized groups, which isn't exactly what we're focusing on, but interesting to think about as well. Anyways, back to the male gaze.
As we said, we interviewed some friends, and the first of these was Katie McKinley, an undergrad student at Shippensburg University, and she commented on this idea of the male gaze in society.
I think that men find what they can't have to be the most desirable thing. And because femme lesbians are both what men want because they're femme presenting and what they can't have because they're lesbians, that is exactly what they want.
I think what Katie says there is super interesting because she describes men wanting lesbians, especially feminine lesbians, merely because they can't have them. But the thing is, lesbians don't exist for the purpose of male pleasure or entertainment, right?
Well, in our research, we found evidence of this very phenomenon that Katie mentions, where femme lesbians are considered the most desirable in terms of the male gaze. In Samantha DiCapo's article, Bisexual Women's Experience with Bi-Negativity in Romantic Relationships, she mentions objectification theory and how it suggests that women are sexually objectified and are valued in terms of their physical appearance and their body's sexual functions as intended for men's sexual desire. So, while queer women don't exist for the purpose of male pleasure, the patriarchal society we live in perceives them as doing just that. However, as times and society change, more and more movies and TV shows are incorporating the female gaze. One such example is the movie Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which was released in 2019. Dr. Nicole Santalucia, a professor at Shippensburg University, spoke about the female gaze in this movie during our interview with her. So let's give it a listen.
The women, it was through the female gaze, of and that in itself, it wasn't like these intense like sex scenes to capture the passion and I think they did that beautifully. I know that among the lesbian community, there was a couple of podcasts I was listening to, that really just were, head over heels over it, and it was all about, lesbians responding and seeing, like, uh, the way in which through the female gaze at other women and the characters, and the way in which there was just this intensity that did not have to be this like big bed scene, and so yeah, so there, and it's because it was women. It was because women, they knew how to portray that.
According to Maya Reddy's article, The Rainbow Effect Exploring the Implications of Queer Representation in Film and Television on Social Change, representations of queer women in texts after the millennium are distinctly stylized as femme, which is essentially a synonym for heterosexual. This again reinforces the idea that Katie brings up, that in media, queer women are portrayed as femme because it fulfills this desire not only for a forbidden love, but one with a woman who looks how men want her to look.
So, before we get any more in depth about mass media, what are we referencing when we say mass media? Some examples of popular movies or TV shows that were brought up or talked about specifically in our interviews and research include Sex and the City, The L Word, Pose, Blue is the Warmest Color, The Fosters, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Orange is the New Black, and Grey's Anatomy. Notice these are all corporate, big budget productions.
So, we have this whole idea of accurate representations of queer women in media. Our friend Katie also talks about this, so let's hear what she had to say.
But I also think that it presents an illusion. I think that's the most dangerous aspect of mass media. It's not intended to directly reflect our lives and to perfectly represent us. It's meant to give us what we think we want, or it's meant to tell us what we are supposed to want.
So, even in the media that isn't created for the male gaze, queer women still struggle to find accurate depictions of their lives in mass media. They might see queer women who have similar identities or check all the same boxes, but as for the actual depictions of the everyday life of the average queer woman, mass media falls short. In our discussion with Dr. Santa Lucia, she brought up how her first real feelings of representation in media came through a strong woman character rather than specifically a queer woman character.
I would say a movie like Twister with Helen Hunt. So I no, I'm not kidding. Twister, right? Twister, with Helen. Was it Helen Hunt or Helen Hunter? I always forget. She was, I mean, the sexuality at this point doesn't even matter to me, because she just in that role appears to me as fitting a little bit of a queerness. There's a little queer vibe, and maybe it's just that she has power as a female, and the men listen to her. Her team is mostly male, and she's chasing literally twisters, and chasing the weather. Any sort of woman that has like a sense of command, and is not putting up with anyone's bullshit. That's maybe where I start to identify. It has less to do with like the sexuality, even, because I just look at most of these women, I'm like, oh my God, they totally make out with another woman. I know it. But there's just that, when a woman comes across as powerful and sexy, in their roles, it's like automatically I like see this sense of fluidity, and women are more likely to be honest and fluid in a lot of ways, from my experience of where I come from.
When queer women consume mass media, they know not to look for queer characters to identify with, so they tend to latch onto representations of any strong woman. When media portrays sexuality as only a sex based thing, not only will the larger society begin to perceive it as so, but also queer women who are only exposed to that narrow minded narrative. Dr. Stephanie Gerard, a current administrator and former professor at Shippensburg University, spoke about this widespread influence of mass media when we met for her interview.
And people often said, well, why do you have to parade in the street? Why do you have to tell people about your sexuality? Straight people don't do that. But it was a way as a minority in society to find other friends, quite honestly. But the media sort of, again, hyper focused on the sex piece, sort of informed or educated the larger community about, to also focus on that.
Notice how we said mass media. Going back to Maya Wrighty's article, The Rainbow Effect, she explains how oftentimes in mass media, the queer woman participates in sexual acts, but never in the context of a real relationship. However, we aim to examine the rise of media platforms like TikTok and how queer women are increasingly exposed to more realistic content that's not focused on the sex and sexuality.
Speaking of more realistic queer relationships, we had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing popular TikTok creators Victoria Williams and Lindsay Benny about their thoughts on the matter. But before we cut to their audio, I just think everyone should know they have a combined total of over 650,000 followers. Let's just say we were pretty excited to hear what they had to say and pretty excited that they even responded.
I don't know if you guys follow Chris and Ian. This is super random, but I love them. They're a gay couple on TikTok.
Yeah.
The reason why I bring them out is because it's like it gives this positive aspect of LGBT relationships where there's no sexualization. Like I can think of probably 3 videos in the 500 that I probably posted this year of us kissing, and it's like none of it, And these kids finally seeing being in an LGBT community is not like the movies. It's not all about hookups and making out or, like it's just like you're doing normal couple things. You're figuring out how to love each other. You're figuring out how to be with that person and how to plan a future. It's not just hookup life. I think that's a big thing.
Victoria and Lindsay are pointing out here how they are using TikTok to reach a large audience, yet not be stifled by the restrictions and stereotypes ingrained in mass media like Reddy suggests. They post content where the queerness of their relationship is not the main focus of the video, it's simply an aspect of their life together. Just as a straight couple being in a video together is not automatically about their straightness.
In that same vein, another undergrad student we spoke to, Bree Shiano, also spoke about the positives of individually created content.
And I think that a lot of queer women, like I said, they represent themselves in such a positive light. And it seems like they're almost like moms to those who are like younger, because a lot of teens and young adults are on TikTok. So when they speak out about their experiences and these couples in very happy queer relationships, they like to speak almost to like their audience of like younger kids and just try to inspire them and let them know that in the end, everything's going to be okay. And once you grow up, you don't have to worry about things that might bother you or kind of affect you when you're younger, especially growing up with, your sexual identity.
Bree specifically talks about how positive queer representation on social media is important, especially for youth who are seeking out a queer community to take part in. When a person first comes out, regardless of their specific situation, one of the first things they're going to be looking for is a community where they feel like they can fit in, where they feel like they belong. For example, in the DeCapua article, it's discussed how women who identify as bisexual are simultaneously criticized by straight society for being too queer and by gay society for being too straight. So having this positive, inspiring, and welcoming community on the internet is an amazing thing to have, especially for youth who are questioning or just now discovering their sexual identities. Bree also emphasized the importance of communities by highlighting the invalidation that can come from individuals outside of the queer community.
It's interesting how the whole community is so sexualized. And even transgender people, that's something that is often overly sexualized. People are constantly wanting to know what's in someone's pants, which is so weird if you think about it. It's like, why are you even thinking there? Why has your mind even gone there? But then it gets completely reversed because people who identify as asexual are just completely invalidated. So I feel like there's such an issue with invalidation in the community, not even by people within the community, but people from the outside. It's like you don't have to understand it to respect it.
What's important to note about these queer communities, however, is that they can sometimes be harmful to queer youth if the viewers are seeking to replicate the lives of these models. The queer community isn't a recipe box. You don't just pick out something you want and follow a 5-step plan to become that. You have to find your individuality, find yourself, and then go from there. We found out from Victoria and Lindsay that some viewers even lashed out because they felt like they were in a community where they couldn't be themselves and couldn't live as freely as the role models they were seeing online. Let's listen to what Victoria and Lindsay had to say about that.
Literally like 3 days ago, one of those same people that commented on that video, DM'd you privately. You forgot.
Yeah, she did. She DM'd me. I didn't even I knew that she commented, but then she DM'd me on my Instagram and was like, "Hey, I just commented on your TikTok and I want to say sorry because I'm actually," she commented something mean, and she was like, "I want to say sorry, I live in a really small town and I'm actually a lesbian and I don't know how to deal with it and all this stuff." So that was very surprising, but
it's also like what I was telling you when you told me about it. It's also another demographic of people that people forget about.
Having a safe community full of role models like Lindsay and Victoria is great. However, idolization becomes dangerous when it turns into blind or careless replications of role models.
You know why?
why?
Because of all those kids that comment on our posts and things, and they'll be like, we'll go to their page and they're like 12 or very young. Like you can tell they're very young and they're like, really want to come out to my parents, but I'm so nervous. And it's like
pressure almost.
Yeah, it's almost like this pressure to want to be like what you're seeing so quickly.
Yeah.
Those replications can then become over-exaggerated and eventually turn into mainstream trends and stereotypes rather than realistic portrayals of experiences. In Anna Marie Storti's research study, Reconceptualizing the Normative, a glimpse into the radical and ultimate failure of queer politics, she found that over time, as more and more lesbians began to surface in films, television shows, and magazines, this specific increase of lesbian identity was criticized as somewhat of a fad rather than a move towards equal representation. This point from Storti draws attention to the differences between authentic representation, simple reinforcement of stereotypes, and corporations just trying to appeal to their viewers.
This brings us to the idea of the body as a text. Whether we know it or not, we can consciously and subconsciously find meaning from signs and symbols created by how we present ourselves. These signs and symbols can be a wide range of stylistic choices, like how we dress, the way we style our hair, and present ourselves to society in general. If you know anything about Judith Butler, you'll know that gender and sexuality are performances and are entirely constructed by how we act them into existence. That being said, these signs and symbols queer women have developed to communicate with each other have become prominent tools within the community.
Victoria and Lindsay talked about the need for a precarious balance when using signs and symbols to identify yourself. They said that they have both consciously made stylistic decisions in the past to try to get the meaning of those signs and symbols across to other women in the queer community, yet they also expressed concerns about taking it too far and getting looks and judgment as a result. One example Victoria gave was deciding not to wear heels out to the bars. Though she enjoys wearing heels, she thought not wearing them would give her a better chance of getting other queer women to notice her. Another thing she mentioned was cutting her hair. In the recent past, Victoria shaved her head and said this was something that seemed much more dramatic and drew a lot more attention, whether good or bad, from strangers. I think what Victoria and Lindsay were getting at here is that there's this constant struggle for queer women to make themselves known to people within the queer community, yet not completely unveil themselves to a potentially unaccepting society. Lindsay even calls it a double-edged sword.
Oh my gosh, have you seen those TikToks where a girl will have the song Sweater Weather playing and the caption on the screen says something like, guys, there's something I need to tell you, dot, 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 and then they cuff their jeans and it's supposed to signify that they're bisexual?
Oh, yeah, and then there's also the same sort of thing, but for announcing you're a lesbian. And you play Girl in Red wearing a red shirt, and then there's another one where the girl will put on a hat backwards and pull a chain out from inside her shirt.
Yeah, it's crazy how Those are such subtle actions, but when we see it on our For You page, we immediately understand their meaning. And what's so interesting to me is I don't think every generation would be able to understand these signifiers. So they almost act as a secret code.
Well, what's the secret code?
So there's a lot of little signs and symbols that can be signifiers of a queer woman, but of course you can never truly judge a person's identity based on how they look. For example, more feminine looking lesbians might be less likely to exhibit the signs we just mentioned, and as Tori points out, this common form of recognition not only allows lesbians to distinguish each other, but oftentimes creates invisibility for those more feminine looking lesbians who do not necessarily fit into accepted lesbian styles.
To find out what these accepted lesbian styles are, we asked everyone we interviewed for examples of signs and symbols that distinguish someone as a queer woman. These are just some of their answers: flannels,
Short nails,
button ups,
denim jackets,
white vans,
absolutely larger than life glasses,
undercuts,
chains,
eyebrow slits,
thumb rings,
more adventurous hair colors,
cuffed jeans or cuffed sleeves on a shirt,
lots of tattoos,
basketball shorts,
a good blazer,
Doc Martens,
beanies.
and of course, wearing rainbows.
I'm not gonna lie, I feel called out. It's crazy how these signs and symbols help me express my identity as a lesbian, but by buying into them, I'm also just perpetuating and reinforcing that various stereotypes that I hate. I don't like being put into a box, but I guess I really only have myself to blame for that.
I guess so. You know, when we started on this journey of examining the hypersexualization of queer women in media, I was skeptical of how accurate these depictions of queer women were. And I think through talking to the people we interviewed and reading texts like Mulvey, Butler, DiCapua, Storti, Rafauf, and Reddy, I've only become more aware of the inaccuracies and stereotypes perpetuated in mass media. On the other hand, it was so interesting to discover the leaps and bounds made by individual creators like Haley Kiyoko, Lindsay Benny, and Victoria Williams, who have taken back their image as queer women and worked against the male gaze.
Oh, absolutely. Representation of queer women has come so far, but as we've seen, there's still so much work to do. Dismantling the male gaze, reclaiming our bodies as texts, and dismantling the hypersexualization of queer women in media. Young queer women should not have to grow up feeling like their identities are invalid or exist only for male entertainment or pleasure. They deserve to watch a movie or TV show and see a character where they can say, "Oh my god, that's me." That's exactly what I want society to work towards.
Exactly. And I think our goal for this whole project and putting it together as a podcast was to help shed light on the problems of the past and examine the intricate complexities of these issues. And along the way, by reaching out to the queer community and looking at what various scholars had to say, I think we've become better advocates for accurate representation.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you all for listening. That is it for this inaugural episode. We hope you had as much fun listening as we did while making this. Wherever you are, whatever day it is, go change the world.